Your speech impressed me very much. Two things. The first thing is that the ASEAN has been playing a very important role in Asia-Pacific region and the East Asia region. The second one is that the ASEAN is facing a great challenge. The space for the ASEAN to be a neutral player or actor in this region is shrinking. I agree with you. Because this region is facing a great challenge. The challenge is coming from strategic competition between China and the US, and it is going to be more intense if you are pessimistic about the future. It is going to be intense. So I would like to show you my observation on this issue, China-US strategic competition and East Asia security. My question is, what this could happen? What kind of changes have come to the regional security order? In the last 3 years, we have just experienced a very intense regional confrontation. This confrontation was caused by a competition, a strategic competition between China and the United States. I call it a regional confrontation or regional tension because it is not just, it is a different confrontation. It is different from the past. In the past, we have saw many confrontations between China and the US, but this time is different. Why it is different? Because some East Asia countries, especially the ASEAN member states, are involved in this confrontation. Some of them have been taking sides with one of them, with China or with the US. So the competition between China and the US has become a competition between East Asian countries. That's a problem. That's why I call it a regional tension. Maybe it is most intense confrontation since the end of the Cold War. So I would like to say the first one is what is could happen. Because China is rising. Everybody realized that China is rising, and China has become more confident. And the US has used its diplomatic and economic and military resources to restrain China. So the Obama administration implemented its policy towards East Asia, which is called Return to Asia, or rebalance in Asia-Pacific region. It has strengthened its military alliance with Japan, with South Korea, with the Philippines, and with Australia. And it also enhanced its military presence in this region. And it also has pushed forward TPP to restrain China in economical ways. So this policy, this returning to Asia or rebalance to East Asia is a very complicated policy. And China, Japan, and some Southeast Asian countries have been tried to use this opportunity, which is given by the US, to promote their own interests, especially these countries who have territorial disputes with China, like Japan, the Philippines, and Vietnam. So that's a problem why we have such kind of regional tension. China has been criticized for its policy changing. Many medias reports internationally criticize China, and China has become more assertive, aggressive, and more much tougher than ever before. That's right. I agree with them that China has changed its policy towards its neighboring region, towards the US. So China become more confident China become more active. China wants to reshape its neighboring environment. China doesn't want to be just a reactor to this region. China wants to be an actor to shape the region together with the U.S. That's why President Xi Jinping proposed a name, a concept for U.S. and China relations, new type of major power relations. We can read from this information that China is becoming more confident. China wanted to play an equal role with the U.S. This has never been happened before in the past. So that's a new China diplomacy. And the President Xi Jinping has put forward many concepts, new concepts for China. But two of them are the most important one. The first one is One Belt, One Road, which means Silk Road, economic belt, and the 21st century maritime Silk Road. These initiatives have been pushed by the Chinese government. And this initiative or this strategy has brought many cooperations or more cooperations between China and its neighboring countries. I'm not an economist, so I will leave this topic to other panelists. I'm more familiar with the second one, the second important concept, core interests. In the whole world, only China puts the word as its national strategy, core interests. This is the first time in China's history, in China's diplomatic history. And this new concept has brought more confidence, confidence between China and its neighboring countries. That's what I wanted to show you. What is China's core interest? What has changed in China's diplomacy? If you want to know what has changed in China's foreign policy, you must learn or know what's the difference between the traditional Chinese diplomacy and the new Chinese diplomacy. The traditional China's diplomacy has two basic assumptions. The first one is that China always think that a more moderate international situation is always better than an intense international institution. China like a stable, peaceful environment. This is very important, even become priority for China's top diplomacy. The second one is to maintain a stable and friendly relations with other neighboring countries. This relationship is always more important than defending China's own national interests. Since 1949, China's foreign policy has upheld these two principles. But now things has happened. China doesn't want to keep these two assumptions. China has changed these two assumptions. To some extent, we have overturned these two assumptions by using their core interests concept. So what is China's core interests concept? In September 2011, the Chinese government issued a white paper called China's Peaceful Development. It is a very, very important white paper. If you want to study China's foreign diplomacy, new diplomacy, please read this document. It's very important. And in that document, the Chinese government lists three core interests. Please see the first one. It's about national integrity, territorial integrity and national reunification. What does that mean? It means South China Sea, East China Sea, Diaoyu Island, and Taiwan issue. These are all China's core interests. Before 2012, China has never said that Diaoyu Island is China's core interest. But in 2012, the Chinese people told the Japanese people, senior officers, a meeting between these two countries. The Chinese senior officers and scholars told the Japanese senior officers and scholars, Diaoyu Island is China's core interest. And in this July, the Chinese government declared that the South China Sea is China's core interest. So this is China's core interest. Please remember this new change. Use this new concept. China is no longer the past China. It's a new China, new China's diplomacy. This new diplomacy is called great power diplomacy with Chinese characteristics, which is named by President Xi Jinping. You can see this new word in China's government's documents, great power diplomacy. China has never said China's policy is a great power policy. What does that mean? China is becoming more self-confident. This new diplomacy has expanded China's national interests, created a new image, and may change some countries' expectations about China. This is very important. And let's see the situation. China wants to, the US government wants to rebalance in East Asia, and China wants to defend its core interest. And some countries in East Asia want to defend their own interest. A clash happened. That's why the regional confrontation happened. And in this round of confrontation, China has received 3 benefits. The first one is China has strengthened its control over the disputed area, maritime area. It has militarized some reefs and rocks in the South China Sea. The second one is that China has strengthened its military cooperation with Russia, which is very important for Chinese. The third one is that China still managed to develop its cooperation with the ASEAN countries and ASEAN. We should consider why this could happen. The Obama administration has achieved little. As China became more confident, as China's influence expanded, the US dominance over this region has been undermined. The US was not behaving as tough as its allies expected it to be. Here is the risks and opportunities. The competition between these two big powers is strategic and structural, and it will not disappear in the future. As an American theorist, Mearsheimer in Chicago University, he always say that China cannot be peacefully raised. There will be a military conflict between China and the US. And as President Trump, Mr. Trump win the election and say something that China is very unhappy with, we can predict that in the next 1 or 2 years, the bilateral relations between China and the US will be very unstable, very unpredictable, very dangerous. So the next round of confrontation in this region maybe will come soon or later. That's what we want. That's the ASEAN countries, the ASEAN organization needs to consider, needs to take into consideration how to handle this, what kind of a role the ASEAN can play in the future to manage this confrontation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, according to Professor Shen Hangxi, I think we have seen all along the way the diplomacy between China and US. And we'll see clearly that the policy of China has changed a lot since 1949. And I think this is my call action-reaction behavior. And at the moment, we'll see that South China Sea is one of the hot, intense regional, like Professor Chen just mentioned. One of the things that he left for us to look at is the changing the president of the United States on the 20th of January. You see the other U.S. president in power. That might see something changing from the past. At the end, Professor Chen Changxi, that's mentioned about the military conflict in which it's not occur. I remember one of the things that people are afraid, especially those who engage with the analysis of the relationship between China and United States, and they might afraid of the other war might be occur. But I remember that one of the article by Lee Kuan Yew before he passed away, he mentioned that it's not very easy. So this is one of the things I may not ask you at the moment, but I think economic relationship between China and United States might have something to play in the future. This is we might talking later on. So I'd like to move on to our second panelist, in which you see the country. Even though Malaysia is a small country, but I think it has some kinds of vocal role. Especially a few weeks ago, you have heard that Malaysia is talking about the situation in Burma and something about the situation of the leadership in your country, in which United States has paused on something related to the power of corruption, thing like that. So next, we'll see the role of Malaysia and perspective of Professor, who might give us some insights. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. I do not speak for Malaysia. I speak for myself. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to thank Dr. Prapat and the organizers for inviting me to this conference. I'm very happy to be here in Bangkok. After the very comprehensive speech by Dr. Surya, I think there's very little else to say about ASEAN. But in any case, what we have been asked here is to talk about the major powers in the evolving regional security architecture. Now, if we look at 2017, there are three major events that we should be looking at. First, of course, is the coming into office of Mr. Trump as the new president of the United States, as mentioned in January. Secondly, we have ASEAN commemorating its 50 years, and that'll be, of course, officially done in August of 2017. But I believe all the efforts and the celebratory activities will begin as soon as the Philippines takes over chairmanship of ASEAN on the 1st of January. And the third event will be the 19th National Congress of the CPC in China that would take place in autumn of 2017. If we look at major powers, Professor Chen has talked about essentially the United States and China. But I would say that when one looks at ASEAN's relations with other countries, it is not just the US and China that we should be looking at. And in the context of the regional security architecture, we have the interests of others as well that should be taken into consideration. Besides the United States and China, we have Russia, we have Japan, we have India, we have Australia. Of course, there are other ASEAN partners, Canada and New Zealand, but I wouldn't, at this point in time, consider them as major powers as such. And Canada, as we know, has a very interesting relationship with ASEAN. There are times when the Canadians are very enthusiastic about it, but there are other times when they are sort of blowing hot and cold over it. And of course, there is the EU, which continues to have a strong relationship with ASEAN. Let us look at some of the major things that would be happening or that are happening around the world. First, in the United States, Mr. Trump is already lining up candidates for nominations to key posts in his administration. Let's look at some of them. The Secretary of State, the candidate is Mr. Rex Tillerson. He is currently ExxonMobil CEO, and based on that background, he appears to be someone who has close ties with major business figures in Russia, for example. So what would this mean? Could this mean that Mr. Trump will follow up with his somewhat enthusiastic comments about Mr. Putin and Russia during the campaign? And we have his Nikki Haley, who is governor of South Carolina, being named as ambassador to the United Nations. We have Terry Branstad, the governor of Iowa, as ambassador to China. This is very interesting. Mr. Branstad has developed a friendship with President Xi Jinping since, I believe, the early 80s, when Mr. Xi Jinping was a provincial official who had a short stint, or who had a visit to Iowa those days. And we have a couple of generals. General James Mattis for Secretary of Defense. He is somewhat considered as a hawk. We have General Michael Flynn, who is very rightist in his views as National Security Advisor. And we have Randy Forbes, a former congressman from Virginia, who is slated to be the Secretary of the Navy, who is very much into military spending, especially the expansion of the US Navy, and a greater role for the Navy in the Asia Pacific. Now, based on his campaign statements as well as the tweets that have been putting out lately, one can see what are the things that would probably be in store for us in respect of the Trump administration. One is efforts to ease tension between the United States and Russia, and a possible uptake of relations with like-minded leaders in Europe. Secondly, withdrawing from global agreements on climate change. Thirdly, revision of regional and global trade agreements, and we have seen this, I believe, a couple of days after the Asia-Pacific leaders, including President Obama, were discussing these very issues in Lima, Peru, during the APEC summit. Mr. Trump made a statement by saying that he is going to ditch the TPP. Now, he has talked about a possible revision of Iran's nuclear weapons program deal and a wider pullback from any major involvement in the Middle East. This includes ending the American-backed push to force Syria's Assad from power. And as you know, that Russia is now taking a more active stance in Syria. Then there's the question of limiting the number of refugees and immigrants coming into America. And of course, his position regarding terrorism, radical Islam, and so on. And while Trump has called for a more aggressive posture towards China, at least on the economic issues, it remains to be seen what that policy would be. As I said, he has named Terry Branstad, who is a friend of President Xi Jinping, as ambassador to China. But of course, he has also said certain things regarding the One China policy, arising from his phone call with the president of Taiwan. One thing that we need to note is that the administration, as well as both houses, both legislative houses in the United States, will be under Republican control. So in some ways, Mr. Trump would probably have a stronger hand in dealing with these various issues. But of course, we are still in very much a wait-and-see attitude as to how this is going to play out after January the 20th. One major question is the pivot or rebalancing towards Asia. Now, let's move on to China. Let's look at China. As I said, there'll be the upcoming National Congress of the Communist Party of China, scheduled to be held in autumn of 2017. This will be closely watched because there'll be far-reaching changes in the leadership of the Communist Party. But of course, Mr. Xi Jinping, I believe, will stay on. He has been accepted by the party as core, party core. So he will have more time to continue with the initiatives and reforms that he has started. But we're going to have a new fifth generation leadership. And it seems that many of them are strongly endorsed by President Xi himself. So if you look at the current Chinese leadership and foreign policy, Professor Chen has talked about the core interests, about new type of major power relations that have been promoted in the various initiatives. I wouldn't go into that. But let's look at the way China has responded to the question relating to the security of the region as well. Obviously, China is developing a blue navy. It has been developing its military production. The J-20 aircraft, which is supposedly a machine that contains the latest technology, is already in production, it seems. And China is now developing a stealth bomber. And I am told, or rather I've read, that this bomber will actually look like the American B-1 bomber. And the second Chinese aircraft carrier is under construction. And of course, there have been various activities carried out in the South China Sea. Now, obviously, in China, popular nationalism is an important driver of foreign policy. And the various initiatives that have been taken by China has been getting good responses from others, in particular the Belt and Road Initiative. We know that there is a lot of enthusiasm about it in Central Asia and Europe. And I would say that while the US has been busy trying to pivot to Asia since 2013, under President Xi Jinping's initiative, China has been actually pivoting to Europe and the rest of the world. Now, if you look at China, of course, economically, the economy is slowing down somewhat, down to about 6.5% or 6%. But the US economy seems to be on a trajectory of growth of 3 to 4% as estimated by the OECD. Another power that I suppose we need to look at is Japan. Japan is obviously looking for trying to have a more robust engagement in the Asia-Pacific. The Abe administration has certainly been very active in the foreign policy and defense arenas. And there appears to be some tacit competition with China, especially in the economic areas. Now, obviously, if one looks at some of the initiatives relating to economic activities, obviously Japan considers that it is in no position to compete with China in terms of spending money, but obviously Japan is looking at possibly promoting quality over quantity. Now, some of these are manifested in some of the high-speed railway projects and other infrastructure projects that are being initiated in the various parts of the region. As we can see, Japan is, of course, worried about China's growing military footprint in the South China Sea, and therefore Japan has initiated cooperation and even has gone to the extent of providing patrol vessels to the Philippines, to Vietnam and Malaysia. And Japan is also involved in cooperation among coast guards between the Japanese self-defense forces and several ASEAN countries. Now, it looks like Japan is prepared to increase its activities in the South China Sea through joint training patrols with the United States and others. If you look at the Japanese economy, of course, it's not doing well. According to the OECD, it will probably grow 0.8% in 2018. Now, India is another power that under Modi has begun what is known as the Act East policy. It's a more robust foreign policy with greater bilateral, multilateral engagement with middle powers, with Australia, with Japan, with Indonesia. And in many ways, this appears also to be directed at China. And of course, there are two powers that the Indians are concerned with: China, which is a neighbor, as well as Pakistan, which is the other neighbor. And very interestingly, in respect of the Belt and Road Initiative, China has worked with Pakistan, or is working with Pakistan, to develop the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which has, of course, caused a lot of concern for the Indians. But in respect of the Asia-Pacific region, while the Indians are, of course, very concerned about preserving their dominance in the Indian Ocean, as some of the Pakistani would say, India would rather call it India's Ocean rather than the Indian Ocean. The Indians